I turned used tea bags and Epsom salt into liquid gold in 24 hours. If you love houseplants on a sunny windowsill, herbs on a tiny balcony, raised beds in the back garden, or a garden that feeds both your table and your spirit, this video is for you. Maybe you are someone who saves every healthy leaf, checks the soil before breakfast, and feels genuinely proud when a tomato ripens or a rose opens at the right moment. And maybe, like so many gardeners I have met over the years, you are always looking for simple, practical ways to make your plants stronger without wasting money or throwing useful things away. Today, I want to show you something wonderfully humble. We are taking two everyday leftovers that most people barely notice, use tea bags and Epsom salt, and turning them into a gentle homemade boost for the garden in just 24 hours. It sounds almost too simple, but sometimes the most effective gardening lessons begin with paying closer attention to what we already have. In the next part, I will show you why this works, what these ingredients actually do in the soil, and how to use them wisely for healthier, more vibrant plants. If you enjoy down-to-earth garden wisdom shared in a simple, useful way, make sure you join me for the next part. We live in a time when everything moves fast. We buy quickly, use quickly, and throw things away even faster. And when our plants begin to lose their shine, when leaves look pale or growth slows down, many people instinctively reach for expensive fertilizers in bright plastic bottles, hoping for a quick fix. But after many years of working with gardens, soil, and crops, I can tell you this with confidence. Nature has never depended on wasteful habits to create abundance. In the natural world, nothing is truly wasted. What looks finished often becomes the starting point for something new. That is exactly why this simple idea matters. Most people toss used tea bags into the bin without a second thought. And Epsom salt usually sits forgotten on a shelf, seen as something for the bathroom rather than the garden. But when you begin to look at these ordinary household items through the eyes of a grower, you start to see hidden value. Together, they can become a gentle homemade plant tonic that supports growth in a surprisingly practical way. And before we mix anything, we need to understand why this works at all. Because once you see what these ingredients are really doing, you will never look at them the same way again. Now let's move to the first real engine behind this mixture, Epsom salt. Despite its familiar name, this is not kitchen salt at all. It is a natural mineral compound known as magnesium sulfate. And in the garden, those two elements matter far more than most people realize. Magnesium sits at the center of chlorophyll, the very substance that gives leaves their green color and allows plants to capture sunlight and turn it into energy. In other words, when a plant is short of magnesium, it struggles to feed itself properly. That is why magnesium deficiency often shows up so clearly. You may see older leaves turning yellow while the veins stay green, a classic sign that the plant is asking for help. Growth can slow, vigor can fade, and fruiting plants may lose some of the strength they need to perform well. Then there is sulfur, the second half of this compound, quietly supporting the formation of proteins, enzymes, and other essentials that keep a plant functioning well from root to leaf. So yes, Epsom salt can be incredibly useful, but on its own, it is only part of the story. To make this remedy more balanced and more interesting, we need to bring in the second ingredient, and now we come to the second ingredient, the one most people overlook completely, the yews tea leaf. After years of working with soil, compost, and plant recovery, I have learned that some of the best garden helpers are the ones people throw away without thinking. Once your tea has done its job in the cup, those damp leaves still carry value for the earth. They contain organic matter along with small amounts of nitrogen and potassium, and that makes them useful food for the living community inside your soil. When tea leaves begin to break down, they help feed the microbes that make healthy soil possible. And when your soil life improves, everything above the surface begins to respond. Roots explore more easily, moisture is held more steadily, and plants often grow with better balance and resilience. Tea can also gently nudge the soil towards a slightly more acidic condition, which can be helpful for certain plants that prefer that environment. But this is where experience matters because there is an important warning. Not every tea bag belongs in your garden. Many modern tea bags contain synthetic fibers or are sealed with plastic, and those materials do not break down the way natural gardeners hope they will. So the safe approach is simple. Open the bag, use only the loose tea leaves, and discard the bag itself if it is not fully compostable. That small step protects the very soil you are trying to improve, and it brings us closer to using this mixture the right way. Now that you understand why these two humble ingredients matter, it is time to bring them together and make the mixture itself. This is the part gardeners love most because it is simple, affordable, and deeply satisfying. You do not need fancy equipment, and you do not need a shelf full of products with complicated labels. You just need a few used tea bags, some plain Epsom salt, clean water, and a container large enough to let the ingredients steep properly. Start with 5 to 8 used tea bags, preferably black or green tea, because they are simple and dependable. Avoid heavily flavored blends or anything with added oils. Next, measure 2 level tablespoons of plain unscented Epsom salt. Add both to 1 gallon of water in a clean bucket or large jar. If you are using tap water, it is best to let it sit out first so the chlorine can dissipate. That small step matters because healthy gardening is not just about feeding plants. It is also about protecting the living soil biology that supports them. Open the tea bags and empty only the leaves into the water. Then stir gently until everything is well combined. Place the container in a shaded spot and let the mixture steep quietly. Over that resting time, the leaves begin releasing their compounds while the magnesium sulfate dissolves into the water, creating a mild homemade tonic that is far more useful than its humble ingredients suggest. And once that steeping is done, the next question becomes even more important. How do you use it the right way? Now we arrive at the most interesting stage of the process because this is where a simple homemade mixture begins to show real purpose. After the first steep, the water should have deepened into a rich amber color, a sign that the tea leaves have already released many of their soluble compounds into the liquid. At this point, what you have is more than colored water. You have the beginning of a plant tonic, one part rooted in organic matter, the other waiting for its mineral boost. This is when the Epsom salt comes in. Add your measured amount to the tea water and stir until the crystals are fully dissolved. Then let the mixture rest again, bringing the full brewing time to 24 hours. That timing matters more than people think. Good gardening often comes down to patience, and this short waiting period allows both ingredients to settle into a form that is easier to use and gentler on your plants. What makes this brew so appealing is the way it works on two different speeds. The magnesium in Epsom salt dissolves readily in water, which means it becomes available quickly once the solution reaches the root zone. That gives plants access to a nutrient closely tied to chlorophyll and healthy green growth. At the same time, the tea contributes softer, slower benefits by supporting the soil environment and adding a touch of organic value that lingers beyond the first application. One part acts quickly, the other works more gradually, and together they create a balanced rhythm that feels very natural in the garden. But even the best homemade remedy only shines when it is used correctly. Now the full 24 hours have passed and this homemade liquid gold is ready to be used. But before it ever reaches your plants, there is one important step that should never be skipped: straining. Pour the mixture through a fine mesh strainer or cloth so the loose tea leaves are removed cleanly from the liquid. Those spent leaves have already done part of their job, but they are still valuable, so do not throw them away. Add them to your compost where they can continue feeding the cycle that healthy gardens depend on. Once the liquid is strained, the next step is what makes this safe and effective rather than excessive. It needs to be diluted. This brew is too strong to use at full strength, especially around roots that are already working hard. Mix 1 part of your concentrate with 2 parts plain water. That simple ratio gives you a gentler solution, one that can support the plant without overwhelming it. In gardening, more is not always better, and restraint is often what separates a helpful treatment from a harmful one. Now pour that diluted mixture into a watering can and apply it where it matters most, directly at the base of the plant where the root zone can absorb it steadily. This is especially useful for plants that tend to appreciate magnesium, like tomatoes, peppers, and roses. A modest amount around each plant is enough. You do not need to drench everything. Used every couple of weeks during active growth, this tonic can help support greener foliage, stronger stems, and a healthier overall look. And yet, even with all these benefits, there are still a few warnings every wise gardener should keep in mind. Before you rush off to pour this on every plant you own, we need to slow down and talk honestly about the risks, because this is where good gardening separates itself from guesswork. One of the biggest mistakes I see, especially online, is the idea that if a little helps, then more must help even more. In the garden, that is rarely true. This liquid gold can be useful, but only when it is used with care, moderation, and a real understanding of what your plants actually need. Epsom salt is not a miracle cure, and it should never be treated like one. Soil chemistry is a balancing act, not a race to add more nutrients. Too much magnesium can interfere with the plant's ability to take up other essential elements, especially calcium and potassium. And that brings us to one of the most common myths in home gardening: the claim that Epsom salt fixes blossom end rot on tomatoes. In reality, blossom end rot is tied to calcium problems, often made worse by inconsistent watering and root stress. Adding extra magnesium in that situation can push the balance further in the wrong direction. It is also important to remember that not every plant wants this kind of feeding. Succulents, cacti, and carnivorous plants come from environments where nutrients are naturally limited. So a mineral-rich drench can do more harm than good. The real lesson here is simple but powerful. Observe before you act. Watch your plants, understand your soil, and use this mixture as an occasional support, not a constant habit. Because in gardening, wisdom is not just knowing what to add, but knowing when to stop. The longer I work with gardens, the more convinced I become that gardening is never just about growing food, flowers, or foliage. Yes, we care about stronger roots, greener leaves, and better harvests, but the garden is always teaching something deeper if we are willing to notice it. When we take something as ordinary as used tea leaves and a little Epsom salt and turn them into nourishment, we are doing more than making a homemade plant tonic. We are participating in one of nature's oldest truths. What seems finished is not always finished, and what looks small can still hold tremendous value. That lesson matters far beyond the garden gate. In modern life, we are constantly pushed towards speed, convenience, and replacement. We are taught to move on quickly, throw things out quickly, and search for instant results. But the garden resists that mindset. It reminds us that renewal often happens slowly. It happens through cycles, through patience, through trust in processes we cannot always see right away. Soil becomes richer through breakdown. Plants become stronger through steady care. Even the scraps we overlook can become part of something vibrant again. And maybe that is why gardening feels so grounding for so many of us. It teaches us to look again at what we almost dismissed. It teaches us to respect timing, to value hidden potential, and to believe that with the right conditions, life can return in beautiful ways. When we work with nature instead of against it, we do not just grow healthier plants, we grow into calmer, wiser, and more observant human beings too. So the next time you finish a cup of tea, pause before you throw anything away. In the right hands and with the right understanding, something that seemed ordinary can become a small but meaningful gift to the garden. A few used tea leaves, a little Epsom salt, and 24 hours of patience can come together to support greener growth, healthier soil, and a more thoughtful way of caring for the plants we love. And that, to me, is the real beauty of gardening. It teaches us to notice more, waste less, and work with nature in a way that feels both practical and deeply satisfying. Not every remedy has to come from a shop shelf, and not every answer has to be complicated. Sometimes the most effective habits begin with simple observation and a willingness to reuse what we already have. I would love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever repurposed something unexpected in your garden and seen great results? Share your experience below, because your ideas may help someone else grow with more confidence. If this story changed the way you look at the simple scraps in your kitchen, please subscribe and like the channel. We are uncovering the natural history and wisdom that often gets overlooked. Let's cultivate a better future together. The next treasure of garden knowledge will be revealed soon.